This case takes place in the United States of America. When exactly it occurred is unknown. Clarence Butterfield was born in April of 1957 and worked as a carpenter. He married his wife in 1983 and the two had 2 children together, Rebekah, born in 1984, and Jedediah, born in 1988. The relationship was far from a happy one, as Clarence was known to be violent towards his wife Catherine. He would often beat and torment her. According to court documents, Clarence once tied up Catherine and submerged her in a large bucket of ice. In 2004, she had enough, and she left Clarence. Shortly after their breakup, Jedediah also left the home, leaving just Clarence and Rebekah living together alone. According to what Catherine would later say, both Rebekah and Clarence had a strong relationship, and she loved her father very much. In July of 2004, the police received a call from Clarence. He informed the operator that some people had broken into his house, stolen some belongings, and stabbed his daughter Rebekah, who at this point was 20 years old. The police arrived on the scene and found Rebekah with a wound to her upper thigh. She was taken to hospital and patched up. Clarence was questioned about the incident, but pretty quickly they could tell that something wasn't right, so they dug further. Clarence then admitted that he was the one who had actually stabbed his daughter and that the story was a fabrication, although he told officers that it was an accident and claimed that he would never hurt Rebekah. As far as I can tell, no further action was taken and Rebekah continued to live with Clarence. In 2006, Rebekah, accompanied with Clarence, entered an emergency room. She had a severe injury to her foot. X-rays were taken and it was found she had a bullet in her ankle and some old wounds on the top of her foot. Again, it doesn't seem like this was investigated much further. Around this time, the two lived in a motorhome together on an estate that belonged to one of Clarence's old friends named Frank. At the end of December 2006, Frank noticed that he hadn't seen Rebekah for some time, so he asked Clarence where she was. Clarence assured Frank that Rebekah was doing well. He told him that she had simply gone to live with her mother for the foreseeable future. Frank didn't think too much about this and just accepted Clarence's explanation. He didn't know that she had also stopped showing up for work around the same time with no explanation. In January of 2007, Jedediah came to visit Clarence and Rebekah. However, upon arriving, he of course noticed that Rebekah was nowhere to be seen. Jedediah asked his father where she was, but he began to dance around the question and didn't give a clear answer as to where she was and even came up with some rather bizarre explanations. First, he told Jedediah that she had gone to live with her boyfriend, but Jedediah dug a little deeper. Eventually Clarence told him that she had been eaten by a shark. What I do find odd is how much time passed before a missing person report was filed. It was in 2008 that it would finally happen. Catherine made a call to Clarence and demanded to know where Rebekah was. He replied and told her that she had died in a surfing accident in a different country. Catherine was confused and deeply concerned. After this phone call, she contacted the police and filed a missing person report. Officers tried to contact Clarence, but he never responded. However, this wouldn't matter, as the truth of what happened would soon come to light. Clarence had written a number of fraudulent checks, and in September of 2008, he was arrested for these crimes and sent to jail. During his time in jail, he began talking to an inmate who was due to be leaving in the coming days. Clarence told this man about his motorhome and told him that when he gets out, he can have the motorhome if he could get to it before it was towed away by the police. But under one condition. He had to dispose of a large freezer inside the motorhome. The man asked what was inside this freezer. Clarence replied and said, "Oh, just some dead fish." This fellow inmate, however, would never get a chance to retrieve the vehicle. The motorhome was taken to a towing yard and workers looked inside. Upon entering, they were met with a foul-smelling odor coming from the freezer. The workers then looked inside this large freezer, which was 5 foot in length and wrapped in tape. Inside, they found something that was wrapped in plastic and duct tape. They quickly realized that this something was a human body. The police were immediately called. They investigated the freezer, and inside they found the body of Rebekah. She was naked, her hands and feet were hogtied behind her back, and her body had seriously decomposed. Investigators began looking for more evidence to determine what had happened. They discovered a gun, a homemade silencer, and ammunition. An autopsy was conducted. Several bullets were discovered lodged in various locations of her body, and the bullets matched the ones that were found inside the motorhome. 6 bullets were found in Rebekah's body in total, but this isn't what killed her. She had sustained all 6 before dying. 4 bullets were in her right foot, 1 in her right knee, and 1 in her right thigh. She had also been shot in the side of the head. This was done to cause as much pain as possible before her death. The shots were not intended to kill her. Rebekah also had binding marks on her wrists and ankles, which suggested that she had struggled to get free before she died. She had been locked inside the freezer, and the freezer had been taped up to make it airtight, resulting in Rebekah slowly asphyxiating inside due to a lack of oxygen. She died around 22 months before her body was finally discovered. Her final moments must have been truly terrifying. The police brought Clarence in for questioning. The investigators believed the body was that of Rebekah, but they needed to confirm it. Clarence told them that it was indeed his daughter Rebekah, but he claimed that he wasn't the one who killed her. Like the strange stories he had told his ex-wife Catherine and his son Jedediah, he yet again came up with another tall tale. He told the investigators that he had finished work one day, made his way back to the motorhome, and upon entering, discovered Rebekah unconscious in the shower. He claimed he did his best to perform CPR in hopes that she would regain consciousness, but it didn't work. He then said he tied her up, put her in the freezer, and hoped one day she would come back to life. During the interrogation, Clarence stated that if Christ could have risen from the dead, then why not his daughter? He proclaimed that this was the basis of Christianity, and that he believed God would one day resurrect his daughter. He claimed he had experienced miracles in the past, and said that he just couldn't get rid of his daughter, and that waiting for a miracle seemed like the best option. He said that if there was a 1 in 10 million chance of God bringing her back from the dead, he had to hold on to those odds, telling the investigators that if she was in the freezer, there was a small chance, but if she was buried, there was no chance. Clarence said that he had dug 4 holes to bury his daughter in, but his conscience wouldn't allow him to bury her, because in his words, he didn't see her body as evidence, he just saw her as his daughter. The investigators asked him if his story was true, then why didn't he just call the police? Clarence told the investigators that he never told the police about this incident because he thought that they would never believe him. When questioned about the gun, silencer, and ammunition, he failed to give a reason for them being inside the motorhome, nor could he give a reason as to why those bullets matched the ones inside Rebekah's body. Investigators were not so convinced of his story, and Clarence was charged with the murder of Rebekah. Due to his rather strange confession, Clarence was taken away for a mental health evaluation, but it was found that he had no mental disorders whatsoever. He was evaluated further by a number of mental health professionals, but they all came to the same conclusion. Clarence was fit to stand trial. During the trial, a number of things came to light. Catherine came forward and testified about the horrendous violence she suffered at the hands of Clarence, recalling the time when he tied her up and put her into a bucket of ice, an eerie similarity to what happened to Rebekah. A number of people who knew Clarence also came forward with some very disturbing information. One friend testified that in 2008, he and Clarence were having a conversation. Clarence said that he had done something, then asked this friend to imagine the worst possible thing you can do. The friend replied and said, "Murdering somebody." Clarence replied, "I'm not saying that's what occurred, but you're on the right track." Clarence then told this friend not to tell anybody about their conversation, and especially not the police. A few weeks later, Clarence joked with his friend and said, "I guess you didn't tell anybody because I haven't been arrested yet." Another friend testified. This one said that she and Clarence were having a conversation when he told her that he had killed somebody with his bare hands and that he couldn't get the image out of his head. He then told her that he had a freezer inside his motorhome and that this freezer smelled like rotting meat. It doesn't seem that either of these people mentioned anything to the police until after the murder had come to light. During the trial, Clarence was caught out. The prosecutor asked him how Rebekah was dressed when he found her in the shower of his motorhome. Clarence said he remembered her wearing a certain blue and yellow outfit. However, he also admitted that he had seen the police photos of Rebekah inside his motorhome and said she was completely naked in the images. When asked if he was the one who had removed her clothing, he said no. The prosecutor then asked how it was that Rebekah was naked if he did not take off her clothing. Clarence then claimed that the police were trying to set him up, and stated that he never killed his daughter, telling the court the exact same story he had told the police. In his closing argument, the prosecutor argued that Clarence's story was just unbelievable, and highlighted how he failed to explain a number of key pieces of evidence, such as the presence of the gun, the silencer, and the ammunition, and the fact that Rebekah was naked when she was discovered inside the freezer. Despite all of this, he still continued to claim that he never killed Rebekah, and to this day he sticks to his story. The deputy district attorney said, "He killed the person he was supposed to love and protect," and described Clarence as a vicious, cold-blooded, black-hearted killer, stating that his crimes were beyond any level of humanity. Clarence was found guilty of the murder and torture of Rebekah. When the verdict was read out, it's reported that he showed no emotion. He just turned to one of the jurors and gave them a smile and a nod. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Clarence Butterfield, guilty.
A 7-woman, 5-man jury deliberated for about 2.5 hours before finding that 55-year-old Clarence Butterfield committed the first-degree murder of his daughter, 21-year-old Rebekah Butterfield, during the commission of torture and mayhem. Butterfield, a former carpenter, nodded at jurors as they convicted him of the special circumstances crime. Rebekah Butterfield's nude and decomposing body was discovered in October 2008 in an unplugged freezer in her father's motorhome after it was impounded at a San Clemente tow yard when Butterfield was arrested on an unrelated charge. Investigators believe Butterfield lived in his motorhome for 2 years after Rebekah's death, with her body crammed into a 5-foot horizontal freezer. Clarence Butterfield testified on his own behalf and insisted that he loved his daughter and did not kill her, but came home to find her body lying on the floor of his motorhome and decided to store the body because he didn't think police would believe his story. He also told the jury he believed in miracles and hoped that one day his daughter would be resurrected. Prosecutors argued Butterfield was a monster who shot his daughter 7 times in non-vital parts of her body to prolong her torture. Moments before the verdicts were read, Butterfield scanned the courtroom and waved toward his ex-wife and Rebekah's mother, Catherine, who left Butterfield in 2004 and who watched most of the trial. Catherine Butterfield later said she felt the verdicts were proper. Clarence Butterfield will receive life in prison without the possibility of parole at his sentencing on October 8th.
When asked about how he felt about the sentence, Clarence said, "I get free Bible study for the rest of my life, and free meals included. How can you beat that?" In prison, Clarence spends his time writing poems, many of which are centered around his daughter, who he refers to as an angel. He tells people that his daughter is with him in his cell in spirit, helping him to write his poems and songs. Clarence has also featured on an episode of a TV show called Locked Up Raw, which I do have to say made for some rather strange viewing. During this TV show, he speaks to an interviewer and says, "I have probably cooked over 1,000 meals 2 feet from my daughter's corpse," and went on to say, "That's why I left my motorhome a little bit dirty. If you have a dirty motorhome, it smells, and people don't suspect anything. If it's immaculate and it smells, then people think that's strange," and laughs as he explains this to the interviewer. The interviewer later asks, "If you didn't do it, why was she hogtied and naked?" Clarence then replies and says, "In my mind she is clothed. I'm not lying. My brain sees her as clothed when she died." The interviewer then asks, "Okay, is it possible that your brain won't let you see that you killed your own daughter?" Clarence replies and says, "I guess that's a possibility." This case has to be one of the most bizarre I have ever seen, and I'm surprised it hasn't been covered by other true crime channels. To do such a thing to your own daughter and to act so strangely afterwards is just so eerie and disturbing. What Rebekah must have suffered in her final moments is horrifying to even think about. To be hogtied, shot, and left in a freezer to slowly die at the hands of the man who is supposed to protect you is just horrific. Clarence has tried to appeal his sentence, but from what I can tell, these attempts have been unsuccessful so far. When speaking of her daughter, Catherine said, "She was beautiful inside and out. To the same extent that my daughter, Rebekah Butterfield, was an exceptionally good and loving person, she was tortured and murdered in an extremely terrible way by the person she loved the most, her own father."